Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Rational Female Podcast. And today we've got a great guest, Paul Elam. So he is a very, very prominent, well-known founding figure in the whole men's rights sphere. And I'm very, very fortunate to have him on the channel today. So, Paul, I'm going to start with asking you to tell us a bit about your background and how you became involved in men's advocacy.
Well, first, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Gosh, it's a story I've told a few times, but it may not be familiar to your audience. I had long suspected back in the 80s and 90s when I was working in chemical dependency treatment programs, counseling drug addicts and alcoholics, that there was something amiss in the way we were delivering services, and indeed something amiss in the way society operated with men and women. I mean, I'd already noticed at that part that divorce rates were climbing, marriage rates were falling, the animus between the sexes was increasing, gender feminism was coming into the universities in the late 80s and sort of taking over those programs, especially in the liberal arts and areas of psychology, things like that, feminist theory coming in. But I still wasn't able to put my finger on what was happening that bothered me so much. I just sensed that something was wrong. And in 1993, Warren Farrell came out with The Myth of Male Power, in which he basically laid out the entire argument about men, about the myth of male power, which I think it absolutely is, that there's certainly forms of male power, but there's a lot of forms of male powerlessness too. And he outlined those things and put it out there, and it changed my worldview pretty much overnight. I began investigating this in the area of my work. And for instance, the first thing I did after I gathered this information was started asking my male clients whether they had been physically abused in their relationships. And it turned out nobody had ever asked them. We would assess women who came into our programs for whether or not they'd been abused in relationships because we wanted to watch out for that. And we asked men whether or not they'd been abusive, but we didn't reverse that question for either sex. I came into a staff meeting about that, and I just posed a group question. Why are we not doing this? Because I had found out in my inquiries with clients that several of them had been abused, some of them quite severely during the course of their marriages and relationships. And the instant reaction to that was hostility, people not wanting these questions asked in that environment. And I knew then that, okay, now I know what I haven't been able to put my finger on all this time. There is a gamma bias that's very, very prominent between the sexes, where we amplify men's negative traits. We absolutely reduce any known aspect of them being victims into insignificance, and we do the exact opposite for women. We portray them as victims. We regard them as victims. We need to make changes in order to accommodate women, but we don't confer on them the agency that they can make bad decisions, they can have terrible behavior, they can abuse power just like men. And having that discussion is a very difficult one. Here it is, since 1993, still trying to have that discussion with the world at large. That's how resistant everybody is to it. And that's why I do what I do.
Wow, yeah, that's terrible. So yeah, I have heard this from other people as well, how whenever people try and talk about men's issues, it's basically just shut down. So that kind of leads me on, I guess you've already answered it really, but would you like to tell me about the work you have done overall in the men's rights sphere? So what does your kind of work focus on? What areas? Is it mainly focusing on domestic violence and abuse, or does it focus on men's mental health, or is it a bit of everything? Like, what actual work do you generally do?
I'd say at this point, early on, focused a lot on legal issues for men, ruinous divorce settlements, bias in family law, false accusations, paternity fraud, the normal gambit of issues. But as I sort of matured into this, I think is the best way to describe it, it came to me that most of the negative experiences that men suffer in life, in relationship life, and in relation to women is a result of their choices. And I'm not saying that to blame men for the wrong things that happen to them, but I've rarely, if ever, and I've talked to thousands of men over the years, I haven't found any that couldn't trace a lot of the, like, okay, I married a woman, she became abusive. Well, there were red flags there from day one. I don't think society even encourages women to hide the red flags. A lot of times, I think uh, a lot of what we see in women's attitudes is encouraged by society. The sort of dominance and I am the table attitude that we see in a lot of Western culture right now, that's enabled by men. Uh, and just the pattern of work I've done over the years with men really boils down to mental health. It boils down to boundaries. It boils down to standards. It boils down to what men are willing to sacrifice in order to have a relationship. And as it turns out, most men will sacrifice everything, including their money, their self-respect, any dignity they have, in order to maintain a relationship with a woman. And at some point, we have to give men responsibility for that. It is easy to say, okay, I married a woman. She turned out terrible. Later on, during the divorce, she made false allegations. She got a restraining order on me, got me kicked out of the house. And that is unfortunate. And I don't think that should happen to guys. But until men wake up to the fact that they've surrendered standards in their life and boundaries in order to have relationship with women, this is not going to change. It's going to keep generating the same problems, the same bad behaviors in women will continue to be enabled by men in the pursuit of their approval. So that's where I've landed on this. It is about looking in the mirror, making better decisions, and you can avoid 95+% of the issues that ever affect men, the things that they complain about, her behavior, the way she has to have her way and she's never wrong and she's never accountable about anything. This is behavior that men groom into women. And we have to take responsibility for that in order to make changes.
Yeah, that sounds really, really important. I think a lot of men out there who are struggling with their mental health really need to hear that. So I'm curious, what are some things then you generally tell the men that you work with? So regarding marriage or dating, do you tell them to avoid marriage? Do you tell them to take precautions or sign a prenup? Like, what things do you generally tell the men that you work with?
Well, I certainly advise them that, at least in my opinion, avoiding legal marriage. I mean, you can, I don't know what the laws are in the UK per se about that. I know that they're very different in places like Canada and Australia, where you can be declared de facto marriage by living with someone. In the United States, however, there is not a single jurisdiction in this country in which you can be declared married against your will. And it doesn't matter if you live with a woman, it doesn't even matter if you have children with her, or she can even go to the courthouse and change her name to yours if that's what the couple decides to do. And you still can't be declared de facto marriage. You still don't have to worry about community property laws, about division of assets. A man builds a business over years, and Melinda Gates walked away with $40 billion. You don't have to worry about those things if you don't sign a contract with the state. And my perspective for them is that you don't need a state license to love somebody or to pair bond or to cohabitate or to have children and create a family. You can do that without surrendering and becoming legally vulnerable to the state ripping your life apart. So I advise them against that. But more importantly than that, because there's some men that no matter what, they need the church wedding. That's what they want to do. I'm not arguing with those guys. But what I really focus on, aside from the legal aspect of this, is that you need to go into relationships with your eyes open. Don't be dazzled by beauty or sexual appeal or the flood of infatuation that happens when you first meet somebody that you're attracted to. That stuff all causes irrational thinking. It causes you to ignore red flags. And I assert that those red flags are always there and that men need to have the wherewithal, the boundaries, and the integrity to step away from a woman they know is inappropriate. If she shows vindictiveness early on or the potential to be vindictive, that should be your exit sign right there. I absolutely put this on men. These are your decisions. And if you reject women who are unsuitable for a healthy pair bond, your chances increase drastically of meeting one who actually is. And we have, again, we have to own that.
Okay, so to what extent then do you think this has all been caused by feminism? And more to the point, what does feminism mean to you and how has it impacted gender relations, would you say? I know that's a very big question, so feel free to take your time with that.
Well, it is, but it's an important question, and my answer may not be exactly what you expect. I think feminism is just a symptom of underlying problems. We can say we have this narrative in our head, particularly in the West, that women were historically oppressed; they weren't allowed to do anything. Blah blah blah, and then feminism came along and saved women because it was a movement for equality between the sexes, which of course it never was. It was always a corrupt and absolutely, I want to say, power-seeking ideology that is never going to be satisfied with its power. But I believe it wells up from the underlying current of gynocentrism, which is the ethic that women are first, always first and foremost, that their issues are more important than men's, that men are to sacrifice, women are to benefit from that sacrifice, and that's the natural order of things. And that gynocentrism, I believe, fully is an offshoot of romantic chivalry. We had this ethic installed into society artificially about 200 years ago. A lot of people think that this is the way it's always been, that men become infatuated with women, seek to please them, and it's always been part of the social contract between men and women to operate on this level. But that wasn't true at all for almost all of human history. For most of human history, women worked like dogs, just like men, in order to make families work, because that's what was needed for survival. And there was a social expectation that women had to bring material value to the table in a relationship. We did that for all of recorded history. Every society that's ever existed in human history has been based on the human pair bond. It's what works for human. But the way we pair bonded was vastly different than the way we do it now. We used to do it kind of as a business arrangement and something that benefited both families. But about 200 years ago, after the Industrial Revolution and individualism swept the West, people began pursuing pair bonding based on how they felt, not on the characteristics of the partner, not on the characteristics of his or her family, but on how you feel. And of course, as most adults know, the intense romantic feelings of infatuations fades with time in every relationship. You can't maintain that first 3 months feeling for 30 years. It just doesn't work that way. And so we ended up with this idea that if that intense romantic feeling fades, then the marriage has failed. Not did you produce children? What has your family done for the culture and society around you, which is the way we formally evaluated the worth of relationships, but in how you're both feeling, and especially in a gynocentric culture, how the woman feels. If she doesn't feel loved or attended to enough or paid enough attention to or getting her way enough, then the marriage has failed and the man has failed. And lo and behold, we have a nearly 50% divorce rate, and we have tons and tons of people that are stuck in marriages. And I see this from a men's perspective, men that are stuck because, they coined the term cheaper to keeper for a reason. Men face often financial ruin, half of their assets gone after a 20-year marriage. Uh, and it doesn't matter whether he did all the work to make that happen, she gets to take half of it. And in a marriage that's based on how a woman feels about you at the time, that's not a very wise combination of dynamics, not in my opinion.
No, I really agree. Yeah, I mean, romanticism, which I imagine is what you're referring to, it's really caused a lot of people to have a very distorted view of romance, of relationships, because it's true, society tells us that it's all about love and how you feel. And a lot of people, like young people, I'm young, we all think that's what romance is. And no, it's supposed to, there's no like in taking the consideration of like the practical aspects of it, financial aspects, money, as you obviously know, money is one of the largest causes for divorce. All these things
Sure.
have not been considered anymore. And I think this comes from the way society has broken down the way in which we view marriage, and marriage's intended purpose was supposed to be about keeping society stable to raise children. So yeah, I can see I really agree with a lot of what you say.
I think
Yeah.
romance is the distortion.
Mm,
People recognize, and there's just so tons of literary references to this, and stuff we pull out historically that tells you that for a very long time, people who pair bonded based on infatuation were viewed as crazy and
right.
morally suspect. That this was society recognized that this was, you understand it because of the intensity of the neurochemical floods that you get during infatuation, but the fact of the matter is that it was viewed as nuts. You just didn't do things like that, and people knew why, because it was about survival, about building clans, about contributing to society. Many people even married based as a service to God. That was what people looked at when they thought of marriage, and then suddenly it became all about how people feel in a very transient state of mind, and
Mm.
it's turned into a train wreck.
Yeah, no, I get that completely. So, what does being red pilled mean to you? I guess you would consider yourself red pilled, but what exactly does that term even mean in a contemporary context?
Well, I have the one true definition of red pill. No, I'm just kidding. Um, Red pill, according to some, is just a praxeology. There's no morality attached to it. There's nothing. It is simply the data and information and pattern recognition that informs men what true gender dynamics are like, what the rules really are, and if you view it as a praxeology, then you can respond to those rules and to gynocentrism in a very calculated way that actually I think mirrors the things that you're trying to fight against. That
Mm,
if if the problem is women's sexual manipulation, then you respond to that with a kind of manipulation of your own, triggering abandonment issues, throwing negatives at women, making them feel threatened with your absence. And the stuff does work, but it's on the same level that men are experiencing from women in a lot of cases. I view red pill as what you do with the information.
okay.
Uh, it's a lot more important than the information itself. Red pill data, the information that we've gathered and the notes that we've been comparing online for 20 years about the way the sexes interact, to me, provides a script for self preservation and for the possibility of a healthy pair bond. But it has to come with taking moral action about these rules, not calculated manipulative action in order to satisfy short term gains and exercise control over another human being. I think that's what divides the manosphere right now. And the part that's about the short term gain, much more popular. You can sell sex to men because they're gullible in that way. And we got to be honest about that. They respond to that. What the research, though, says, especially as we look at object relations, that The act of coming together and having sex is actually more about a lot more than the sex itself. It's a vehicle to pair bond, which is how humans are wired. They're connected to form a pair bond, and that, of course, between the sexes, it starts with sex, with sexual attraction, but it matures into something more significant than that in healthy relationships. I think that that healthy relationship is what most men are actually looking for. But we live in a society that is very hesitant to encourage people to have healthy relationships. One of the things I've seen not too long ago was an interview on a television program with several couples that had been together more than 50 years. And it was an exploration of what's the secret here? How did these people have 50-year marriages? And almost to a man, every guy they interviewed that had been married 50 years or more, they asked, what's the secret here? And his answer was, give her whatever she wants. Um, I'm like, well, congrats on the 50 years. I mean, I'm happy for you. But if that's the way you live your life, I would rather be single. Um, uh,
Mm.
I don't want to live that way. I've taken the red pill data and insisted on a healthy pair bond with an accountable adult with agency. And I decided I wouldn't settle for anything less. And that's what I ended up with.
Okay, yeah. I've heard these catchphrases before, the woman that men to the left because women are always right. And, you hear these phrases and they sound humorous, but you have to ask yourself, is this really healthy, this idea that women are always right? Because I think for women as well, it's bad because it encourages cattiness and nastiness between women, not just from women to men. So I think that this just encouraging bad female behavior. And it's interesting you said that most men are looking for a healthy relationship. I've heard people say this, and most modern women say that, men are so disappointing. They just want to hook up and they just want to have sex. And it can feel that way. Like it can feel like most young men are not actually looking for commitment. And I think, like my generation, we actually don't know how to go about it. And I think a lot of this actually is on women because women have just engaged in, a very promiscuous hookup culture and don't actually know how to go about having a relationship. But I think a lot of it, in my view anyway, is the fault of feminism and the fault of societal breakdown of courtship, breakdown of gender roles and traditional values. And I'm not religious, but I do think traditional values are good in the sense that men and women behaving in a certain way and having a goal of having a stable, long lasting relationship. So it's very sad. And I think that, you mentioned the manipulative Machiavellian behavior that some of the red pill can lead to. I do think that this really ultimately it hurts men and it hurts women. And it ultimately just leads to a big collapse in any kind of harmony between the sexes.
Absolutely. I also got to say that it's more than just this ethos of women being right. We coin terms like, if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. I mean, that is an implied threat that unless you make her happy, everybody in that home will suffer. That's exactly what that's saying. That her needs and wants and desires are have primacy in the home at all times. And I think we have to also acknowledge that, like women's behavior of, they're having multiple sexual partners, not looking for anything meaningful while they're young, and then they want a sort of nice beta guy to settle down with after they've had their run in their youth and life. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. Uh, I certainly agree with holding women accountable for their behavior, but I don't think we can ignore the fact that they live in a culture that's egging this on, including from men.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So
It's right.
saying, yeah,
Yeah.
it's feminism. I agree. Feminism. I agree with everything, every word that came out of your mouth. But none of this happens without men's enabling and participation in this,
Cool.
and women buying a defective message, which is what we see going on right now. For every one guy like me, there's a million who want me to shut up. about this so
Yeah.
they can continue to participate in a dysfunctional paradigm. Um, and I don't think we get any better until this does come to a head, until the social collapse really happens. Then both sexes are going to suffer unbelievably compared to what they've always had in human history. But maybe after that, we can enter a period of rebuilding. But right now, it seems pretty hopeless to me. I think all individual people can do
Yeah.
is save themselves.
No, I agree. It is hopeless. And I think, my generation, so I'm Gen Z, I'm 28, almost 29. And yeah, I don't even, I don't see myself getting married. I think that, I'm not going to say I'm more innocent in this either, but I do think that the culture that I have grown up in has really, like, I've just kind of witnessed all of this happen. I think this is actually partly why I'm so against feminism, because I feel like feminism has made everything so much more difficult, and it's made, like, life so hard in terms of how to navigate romantic relationships and how to navigate men and women. And men, we don't understand each other, and as you said quite rightly, a lot of men are, I mean, to paraphrase slightly, men will take advantage of women, they'll take advantage of women's promiscuity, and then women will just kind of not really care and become very nihilistic. It's terrible. So yeah, I really do think that I think that, we should really aim to, I don't know, work towards building some kind of harmony. But you're right, individuals are going to have to sort themselves out. But I would like to ask, what would you say is the biggest issue facing men and boys today?
Themselves.
Okay.
I really believe that. I mean, there are tons of issues facing men and boys. I mean, we can go down the list from circumcision to forced conscription in the military to family law to suicide. Excuse me, uh, uh, to self deletion. Um, these are all very prominent issues that affect the lives of men and boys. But I think the core of this crisis is that men have been detached through the romantic ethos. They've been detached from the ability to navigate their own internal world. It becomes everything men do becomes a response to women approval seeking. How do I get validation? How do I connect with somebody that I want to be with? And it's such an intense drive and so conditioned that they ignore red flags in the process. They ignore their own dignity, their own self respect. They follow a set of rules that lowers them. And then they say, "What happened? She doesn't respect me." Well, like, no kidding. She doesn't respect you. How you can't respect anybody that doesn't respect themselves. And if somebody is more or less groveling for attention and approval, and they're living by the rule that if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. If they're willing to live that way, I don't respect men that live that way. I have no reason to. They don't even respect themselves. So to me, there's the challenge: is how do you navigate your own values? How do you even find out what they are if you're so busy trying to appease and appeal to another group of people? How do you find any sense of meaning in your own life? And I think that's the crisis that we're dealing with. And your commenter
Yeah.
is absolutely right. Men throw each under the bus for brownie points. We betray each other and stab each other in the back. Men do in order to appeal to women. Happens all the time. Um, I can't respect that. I'm not going to.
Yeah, you're talking a lot about male accountability. It kind of makes me think actually of male feminists and men who kind of, I don't know, say that they're a feminist and they want, I mean, I don't want to, like, obviously say negative things about people, but I guess the idea of, like, a man being a feminist, it's almost like, I don't know. I don't know if that can really do men any good in terms of, it sounds a bit like, instead of trying to hold women equally accountable, it's almost like pandering. I don't
It,
know. It's, yeah,
it
just,
is pandering. I think it absolutely is. I don't know how we can define it any other way. Male feminists have bought I mean, and I think it's important to point this out. their counterparts on the other side, what we call tradcon men, the guys that are about so-called traditional relationships. They're really not about traditional relationships. They're about the new tradition, the new kid on the block, not the ancient, understanding of relationships we've always had. They're the same camp. Male feminists are trying to appeal to women. That's their job. They want approval in the eyes of women, and that's why they're doing this. The same thing is true on the exact opposite side of the political fence. You have guys like Charlie Kirk who told men that they get absolutely nothing in a relationship. Nothing is about them until the wife is on easy street. Uh,
Mm,
that's a feminist ethic that
interesting.
men must sacrifice until women don't have to worry about anything. And of course, we can never get there. So it sets up this continual pattern of sacrificing for approval. The guys do on the traditional side do it just as much as a male feminist. I don't see any difference between the two ideologically.
Okay. So do you think then that women have more rights than men overall, or are both sexes victimized in their own way?
I think they do have more rights than men, after all. I mean, there's the right not to be conscripted, which is still enshrined in law. There is abortion rights, which I have terrible problems with. I don't believe that that is a moral thing. Um, but yet they have the right to do it. And I'm not arguing that that right exists. But when a woman becomes pregnant, men don't get a say to terminate parenting. The decision to carry a pregnancy to term or not is really a decision about whether or not I'm going to parent a child. And most of these procedures happen uh, for women who don't want to be inconvenienced by the child, who don't want their lives altered by the child. If a man takes the same position, I don't want my life altered by it. I want to terminate parental obligations and responsibilities and walk away from this. We put him in jail. Uh, there is a real difference in the exercise of rights in that area. Um, Women say, "My body, my choice." Men don't get to say the same thing.
Yeah.
It's his body that's committed to 18 to 21 years of labor in order to provide for this child. If he decides that that's inconvenient for him and he doesn't want to do it, or maybe he never intended to have a child, he has no options. So it's pretty plain to me that women do have more rights, and they have enormously more social power today than men do. Anything out of a man's mouth I mean, people discount me constantly. They don't even examine what I say. Oh, just shut up. You're just another man pining for privilege and another guy that's bitter about women getting rights. I mean, it's a convenient comeback. It's not true, but that's all that needs to be said. And that's what 90% of people will listen to. Women have enormous relational power in society. A woman can point a finger at a guy and say he did something and destroy him entirely, destroy his career, destroy his reputation, ruin everything about him with impunity, and people will believe her. This is this woman-centered ethic that we've come to, and it does interfere with the exercise of our civil rights.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's genocracy. I mean, I do slightly disagree. Like, I'm not against abortion. I would well, my view on abortion is I think it should be safe, legal, and rare. That's my general view. But we don't have to go into that. I'm just saying that for the record. But yeah,
Sure.
I mean, in terms of social power and moral power as well, I really do agree. Women, because of the way in which we are, we do hold a lot more social power. I mean, I was once thinking to myself, like, a woman can decide whether a man is a hero or a monster, for example, like just by, association. And we tend to take women's sides more. We tend to have more empathy, more sympathy towards women. it's really interesting. Interesting in the sense that, it's a strange way. There's probably a lot of reasons for that, but
Well,
I guess, yeah,
there's a core reason for that that I think people should consider and ponder. In when we wonder, how did we end up here with women have this sort of moral authority in
yeah,
society? Who's good, who's bad? That happened with the installation of the Romantic ethic
yeah,
1,000 years ago, and it spread through the aristocracy, and it didn't necessarily give women more political power, but it conferred moral authority on them. During that time in our history, within the aristocracy, women were elevated to the point that they decided what was a good man, what was a bad man, who should be publicly accepted, who should be shunned. And this was practiced for a good 500 years before it spread to the general population. And
mhm,
with that ethic came that social power. And then you look at women's propensity. I mean, tend to be more physically aggressive. Women are relationally aggressive. They
yes,
use relational aggression in order to manipulate and control and punish. And it's very, very effective for them. And we can trace every last bit of that back to romantic chivalry, elevating
okay.
women as the source of moral purity. And once you
Mm.
get that picture in your head, you understand how we got here.
Yeah, that's a lot of food for thought. Yeah, it makes you think of like Scarlett O'Hara. So I guess then you've probably answered my next question, but I'll ask anyway. So, do you support traditional gender roles and believe that men and women should both uphold this in the sense that men should protect, provide, and be chivalrous, and women should provide warmth, emotional safety, nurture, and peace?
I think that's a lopsided deal that any man is a fool to take.
Okay,
Uh,
can you elaborate
uh,
on that?
well, I mean, if your standard is you need to provide warmth, well, isn't that a human standard on everybody? Don't you have to bring some sort of compassion and caring to a relationship? Again, I go back to the historical record. Women until 200 years ago were always expected to bring material value to a marriage. This whole notion of a housewife at home providing love or caring uh, to a marriage as the only standard for what, or having children, and that being the only standard of what she brings to a marriage, that's 1950s Hollywood. That's not paleo bonding. That's not what stretches back into antiquity. That is a model that's been more or less, it came from the romantically chivalrous ethic. It got expressed by Hollywood a lot. It became a huge part of our culture and our media, that the way that people have always done things is the woman stays at home and takes care of the home, and when the man comes home, she makes the environment comfortable for him and she supports him, and she's kind of a helpmeet in that way. That is not what passed for a marriage or a pair bond throughout all of human history. So I take great exception to it. Women are capable of doing this. They've been granted every right. It's 2026. Women can do whatever they want to do for the most part. I mean, there's some jobs that may be too hard for them on average physically, but women are perfectly capable, and they're right now they're out earning men. There's more employed women than there is men. So why would we have an expectation of an adult with agency and material value to be able to leave that in her purse when she shows up for a relationship? That makes no sense to me at all. It's a stacked deal. I didn't take it. I understand why men might find that appealing, but I honestly think that when that's what men want, they just want somebody to be there and to mirror them and to make them feel good about themselves. That's a dependency. And I think that model feeds the dependency that men have on female validation, and it requires almost nothing of women. And guess what? For the most part, they don't do that anyway. Uh, as I said, romantic feelings fade. The sense of this fresh, new, wonderful love fades, Then you settle into the power conflicts of people with two different family of origin systems come together. They have conflict over rules, how they're going to run the relationship. That's where hostility breeds up, and that's usually where most relationships fall apart, is they don't work through the power struggles. Well, how do you work through power struggles with somebody that's not expected to have accountability and agency? I, I, it just doesn't work, in my opinion.
Okay, so when you talk about women being expected to bring material value, what exactly do you mean by that?
Money,
Or do you mean dowry?
dowry, well, I mean, I don't think we can operate on the old model of dowry where the bride's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
father collects a bunch of money over the years and presents that to the groom as sort of a here's how you begin your relationship.
Yeah.
We have to put the onus on women to do that, and they can do it either with a lump sum of money or with earnings potential, that they're showing up in the relationship saying half of this responsibility is mine. And I don't mean dividing things down a rigid 50-50 boundary. There will be concessions depending on the labor that somebody brings to the home. But I think that historically women have been expected to show up with material value, that we won't use that for a euphemism. I'm talking about money and financial assets, which every marriage needs if you want to have children. But right now we're operating under a model where the women says, well, I get to show up and get pregnant and bring love or compassion, affection. But none of it amounts to anything in terms of the financial stability of the family. Women need to bring value, and we're telling them that they are the value just for existing. I don't think that's a healthy model to base relationships on.
Okay, so what you're referring to sounds to me like, I think a lot of it, correct me if I'm wrong, came from the kind of Christian ideal of like the innocent, virtuous woman, and that's where you had the like chivalry has a lot of roots in like Christianity. That's just where I understand it anyway. And this idea of like women as virtuous, women as saintly almost, and yeah, it makes sense that obviously the kind of general narrative of human history kind of predates that. Does that make sense?
Well, yes, in a way, but you have to consider that prior to the 12th century, this didn't exist in Christianity either. Christianity adopted the romantic ethic and began, even I talked about this with Shah recently on one of my podcasts, began forcing men to take a knee during a wedding ceremony before their brides. This ethic was accepted by the church, eventually pushed by the church. I think that the church recognized that, hey, this is a great way to control. Man, if you just appeal to the women and make men submit, which is the exact reverse of what scripture says, but it was a model they embraced nonetheless, and it didn't exist until romantic chivalry existed. So that ethos corrupted the church just as much as it's corrupted society since then.
Okay. So, do you think that modern women in the West can bring any value to modern relationships?
Sure, I'm with
Okay.
one. Uh, 24 years. She
Great.
absolutely brings real, tangible value to the relationship. I do believe that in the West, though, while women have every bit now of men's earning power, if they choose to take it, I don't believe in the wage gap myth or any of
Yeah.
that nonsense. Women are doing just fine financially compared to men. Um, but they're being told the message that his money is my money and my money is my money. That's the attitude most women bring into a relationship these days. And they do it because men accept that. Uh, I mean, we've seen the jokes, the piggy banks with the little pig on top of the big pig, and one of them says his money, and the other says her money. They're both the same piggy bank. Uh, that's the standard that we're operating by, and I think that's what a lot of the tradcons are pushing for in marriage, and I think it's terribly unhealthy. Uh, Why should we not expect women to meet men financially in relationships? To
Hmm.
me, if a woman won't do that, she's not worth my time. And I started rejecting women like that, and I had to reject a whole lot of them, and I got rejected by a whole lot of them because my standards were different. But I did meet one who had those values. And I believe those women are out there and that men can meet them if they quit settling for dependent children posing as women.
Okay, interesting. So, would you say that men's rights on the whole differs from the manosphere, or are they the same thing?
Oh, they're different and the same thing. I mean, all this is on a continuum. It was men's rights and PUAs. I think PUA is a little bit earlier than men's rights, identified with the red pill in terms of describing gender dynamics, and MRAs picked up on that shortly thereafter. It's since then it's sprung into something totally, in my opinion, unrecognizable from the original intent of my work. Um, but I think it's on the same continuum. Men's rights are an issue. But I do think that study and time and maturity leads us to the conclusion that the best way for men to handle the issues around their rights is with more responsible decision making around women, about insisting on a woman's character and testing it. Most men, they don't test a woman's character. They're only there to see whether or not she'll approve and accept. And they'll modify their behavior in order to make that happen and do whatever they think they need to do in order to gain her approval and affection. There's no room for that in, is she vindictive? Does she have good character? What's her history like with men? What's her attitudes about men? What's her attitudes about feminism and about a lot of things? Men just sort of push all that aside and they're playing the approval game. And that's where their problems come from. If you marry a vindictive woman, eventually you're going to see that vindictiveness in full force. And I don't want to rescue men from the responsibility for that. So I want to talk about their rights, but uh, men need to talk about their rights and their
It's interesting
responsibilities.
because a lot of what you're saying in terms of the red pill male side actually seems to fly counter to what I've seen on, like, if I just go by the Reddit, the subreddit red pill women, or what like a lot of modern, we'll say traditional feminine women online say. They say like you should want a man to be a provider, you should want a man to be a protector, you should want a man to take care of you. As the woman, you shouldn't be paying on the first date, you shouldn't sleep with the man too quickly. Like, it does seem like a lot of what you're saying actually runs counter to what the red pill women side say, which is kind of interesting. It's fascinating.
Well, I would respond to that by saying that what the red pill women are saying runs counter to the work we started doing at A Voice for Men in 2009.
Okay.
It's a very different message. I think that it's been co opted by pickup artists. I think it's been co opted by game advocates and by traditional women who are out there saying, no, I want to be the one who's taken care of. Well, yeah, I guess everybody, every child looks for a parent. Uh, but that's what it's saying to me. What they're saying is that I don't have anything to offer other than approving of you. And I'm sorry, men that take that deal do so at their own peril. It is not a healthy way, in my opinion, to connect. The and again, when women call themselves traditional, I have to ask, which tradition are you talking about? Are you talking about the tradition of 1950s Hollywood, where the white knight comes into the rescue and sweeps you off your feet and takes you into a beautiful home and takes care of you for life and you have children? Or are you talking about actual human history, or even the women that were referred to in Proverbs in the Bible, which absolutely instructs them to show up with their sleeves rolled up, working, providing
Mm,
uh,
okay.
material value to a relationship? How a woman who claims to be Christian and traditional can ignore all the scripture, and there's tons of it that point to being selective about women and about women having to show up with real value, not just their beauty. I mean, the Bible's one story after another of men falling out of grace because of their relationships with women and indulging them and worshiping their gods. Um, they're preaching a 1950s Hollywood romantic version of tradition that only existed for a short time, and it's resulted in a 50% and climbing divorce rate and an increasing rate of people not getting married because both men and women are rejecting this deal. I mean, women have walked away from marriage just as much as men, and now we have a rapidly growing community of men that are looking at that kind of deal and saying, "No thanks. Why should I? Get a job, work, and bring your money to the table in a marriage, or you're not even respecting the family or the marriage if you don't do that. You're just an object of caretaking." Um, that's not a way to pair bond anymore. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. The kind of counterpoint to me is kind of thinking about the narrative of men looking at a woman as an object of beauty and thinking, oh, that's kind of beautiful. But I don't know. I guess we have a different perspective on that. But I can definitely see the dark side of it as well. I mean, my view is that I think, I mean, I wouldn't call myself a traditional woman. Not absolutely not. I would say I'm very much, I just say I'm a modern woman, to be honest. If I'm going to be blunt, I'm a modern woman. But I think that what we should focus on more is like looking at ways to hold women and men equally accountable and have a way so instead of like absolving women from bad behavior, actually encouraging women to start to take responsibility for like bad choices they may have made, and actually decide, okay, you know, maybe I should be content with not getting married or having children if I've lived a kind of life whereby I don't think I'd be very good at that. And actually, that's okay. And maybe I can look at what else I can do in life. I don't think women should be sitting whining and saying, oh, I don't have a husband or children. Well, you know, we're all kind of seeing we bring this stuff on ourselves. And I also think that the problem as well is the way women tend to talk to each other. Women tend to be very appeasing and say like, oh, it's okay. Like women don't really seem to be very good with hearing harsh truths. I'm not, you know, absolving myself from this conversation at all, but I think that there's a problem in how, like, the way we communicate with women, we're very soft sometimes, and I see this like on television. I mean, I just think of its show I talk about on my channels where like you have the dynamic between the male and the female, and how the female basically just treats her husband very, very poorly, and he's basically, you know, beta to use a contemporary term. But I don't know, yeah, it's making me think a lot. It's I don't know. It's a tricky one for sure, yeah.
Well, yeah, we don't just aren't just careful about how we address women. We walk on eggshells around them, fearful of offending women in general. It's why we have a hard time having real conversations about gold digging and financial incentives in relationships. Uh, Most women don't want to hear anything about this, and yet more and more we see them ending up turning 40, 45 years old alone with a couple of cats and one toothbrush hanging in the stand in their bathroom, moaning about where all the good men went. And there were good men available the whole time. They rejected them
Yeah.
and put them out of their lives, and that's their choice. I mean, I think if all they have to bring to a relationship is the expectation that their needs and desires take primacy, men are better off without them, and they're better off without a man. I I, I think that's going to end up the best way. It's not going to end well socially for society, because when you begin tearing apart the basic human male female pair bond, you're going to destroy society. Like I said, every society has been based on the human pair bond, all of them. There is not an exception in human history. Even in polygynous societies, there was a primary wife, a basic pair bond unit with everything else being subordinate to it. So that's what we have. And we have conditioned women now and men uh, to basically rip this apart. Men are walking away, women are walking away, men and women, by and large, don't like each other very much. I mean, especially if you pay attention to social media, but I don't think it's just social media. There is animus between the sexes that I don't think there's ever been before. Because we've indulged romantic chivalry and the lopsided social contract, and we've conferred on women way too much social power, and we have held them accountable so little that it's eventually going to destroy things.
Yeah, no, it's terrible, the animosity between the sexes. I mean, yeah, I read a New Statesman article saying that most young women, so women of my generation, don't like men. I mean, well, hate men actually is the correct term to use, and
Yep.
a lot of men are going their own way. So this kind of answers my penultimate question. Then, do you think there is any hope for the future of gender relations?
I'm not very hopeful, to be honest with you. I do think there is hope for any individual to check out of this insanity and to choose a better life. I think that there are available, decent, good men who are fully capable of a loving relationship are out there. I think there are decent, good women that are out there that are available for that if that's what people want to choose. But I don't see a hope overall. We're so entrenched in the men are bad, women are good, this sort of mentality that has fostered all this hate and resentment between the sexes. I don't see it improving until we pay the price for it. And we're beginning to see that price now with people, kids of single mothers, wild on the streets, mobbing places. I mean, this is what's happening, and we can walk on eggshells about it. But when we're talking about youth crime, gangs, stuff like that, we're talking about single mothers and absent fathers, women who viewed the men as disposable, even if they didn't, view the child support as disposable, women breeding with men, then getting rid of them, and then not being able to provide the discipline in a man's in a boy's life that they need for that only comes from men for the most part. I mean, there's some women that can do it, but by and large, it's men that keep young men from becoming sociopaths. And right now, they're being raised by women who can't parent them appropriately. And I mean, if you ever turn on the news in the United States, every night now we have mobs of teenagers going out robbing people, two, three, 400 at a time. That's going on nightly in this country right now, and they're all children of single mothers. Uh, that's one of the effects. That's where we're headed as a society. We have assassination culture now, where chance of death. I mean, we're beginning to sound like Iran here, to uh, wanting to kill people, wanting to kill anybody with opposing views, and indeed killing them. It's happening in our presence right now, and these ethics are because we've removed men from the familial scene. Uh, I don't see it working out well at all. So, no, I got to say, I don't have hope. But again, I reassert my life is great. I lived by different values after I grew up a little bit. I was in my 40s before I ever recognized what was really going on and made changes. But there's nothing special about me. Anybody can do it, and men can save themselves. They can have happy lives whether or not they're in a relationship with a woman. And for some men, they're just not going to do it. I can't say I blame them, but a lot of men still want to, and I think they can if they lead with their values and their self-respect instead of their desires and their needs.
Yeah, and I would say the same goes for women as well. I think anybody who wants to lead, a decent life should look at their values. But yeah, I do have one more thing I really do want to ask you. I saw that you have published some books. It would be good for you to mention them. It would be, yeah, good for the viewers to see. That'd be pretty cool.
Oh, sure. My book, Men, Women, Relationships, is available on Amazon. It's a collection of essays that I've done on this topic. It serves as sort of a roadmap for men to rediscover their values, the importance of them, about living a better life, about pulling back from the gynocentrism, pulling back from feminism, pulling back from romantic chivalry, and adopting a set of values that's actually functional for them. There's also work I've done with Peter Wright over the years, a book on chivalry, a book on men going their own way. All those, if you look at Paul Elam on Amazon, you can find all of those books. And I highly recommend them. I think it's time for a new way of thinking that fits where we're at in the world.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Paul. So we've come to the end of our discussion. Very, very interesting. A lot of food for thought for me. I'm going to go away and think a lot about what you have said today. But yeah, thank you everyone today for tuning in. This man has done a lot of really interesting work, and I hope people have enjoyed it. I will be live again on Tuesday, the 9th of June, so in 1 week. So until then, this is The Rational Female. Thank you, Paul, and thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you for having me.